princess and stops the Garter Parade after Camilla pushed Catherine and left her in tears. 12 days, one page of handwriting, one woman's place in a line, and a procession that has walked the same 200 yards at Windsor every June for 600 years stopped dead in front of the world's cameras because somebody in that line had rewritten it in the middle of the night. Now I'm going to hold the moment it stopped for a while, because it only hits properly once you know what happened in a rehearsal room 12 days earlier and who was standing at the monitors. Stay with me. This one has a document at the bottom of it, and the document is the whole story. If you like the ones where the paperwork turns out to be the weapon, take a second and subscribe, because this one goes further than anybody watching on the day understood. Quick word before we go further. I am HALTS. I spend my time going through the filings, the running orders, the records, and the small print that moves around this family. The things that get decided in rooms nobody films and then arrive on a screen looking like tradition. And what you're about to hear is me putting the pieces together the way I read them. Stay with me to the end, because the last thing that came out of that folder is where this whole thing lands. By the time we finish, you will know what was written on that page. You will know who carried it across the castle. You will know why a woman in her 70s raised one white glove and made a royal procession stop breathing. And you will know what Catherine heard behind a closed door afterwards that finally broke her. Let me take you back 12 days, because that is where it starts. St. George's Hall, Windsor. A closed rehearsal. No press, no public, no cameras except the technical ones. And those are pointed at the floor markings rather than at faces. Dim yellow light on polished boards that have carried this same walk since before the United States existed. Family members standing on tape marks in a suggestive formation while a man with a clipboard counts paces out loud. The atmosphere in that hall changed when Camilla came in. She did not go to her mark. She went to the technical area where the visual team sat behind a bank of screens, and she stood behind them and watched. And what was on those screens was Catherine. Every rehearsal run, the cameras follow the same people, because those are the people the broadcast will follow on the day. So there she was on 3 monitors at once. The turn of the head, the half smile at somebody off to the left, the small adjustment of the ceremonial hat with 2 fingers done without looking. The way a woman does something she has done 400 times. Nothing staged about any of it. That is the problem. And everybody in that room knew it was the problem. Camilla stood behind those screens and watched her daughter-in-law be effortlessly the most watchable person in the building. And she did the arithmetic that she has been doing quietly for 20 years. No title fixes this. No robe fixes this. No amount of standing beside the king fixes the fact that when both women are in frame, the country's eyes go to the younger one. And they always will. Envy is a feeling, and feelings pass. The thing that happened next was a decision. There were about 30 people in that hall. Camera operators, a floor manager, 2 men from the Lord Chamberlain's office with paperwork, a woman marking positions on the boards with white tape. Nobody in that room was there to watch a family. They were there to make a broadcast work. And they had been doing it long enough to know that the safest thing in that building is to look at your own hands. She turned to her assistant, who was standing there with the script folder under his arm, and she pointed at the monitor showing the movement plan. Let me explain the movement plan quickly, because everything in this story hangs off it. A procession chart is a diagram of who walks where and beside whom, and it also decides which people the fixed camera positions can physically see. Get moved 4 feet sideways on that page, and you're still at the ceremony, still in the robes, still on the guest list, and you're no longer on television. That is the entire game, and everybody who works on these events knows it. Camilla's instruction was that the Wales segment of the procession be split into 2 separate parts. Under that arrangement, Catherine would be placed far back behind the tall stone pillars in the hall, out of every main camera angle in the building. The reasoning was not complicated, and she did not bother to disguise it. Reduce the visibility of the couple from Wales. Take the center of the frame for herself and for the king. Lower the temperature of a public that has been getting visibly more excited about the next generation than about the current one every year since the coronation. Control where people stand on the carpet, and you control what the country thinks it is looking at. And here is where she made her mistake. And honestly, it is a mistake she has been making for 25 years. She underestimated her stepson. William was at the front of the lineup on his mark. He heard it. I want you to understand what that man carries when he hears a sentence like that, because it is not about a camera angle. He was 15 years old when he learned exactly what this family does to a woman it has decided is standing in the wrong place. He watched his mother's diary get shorter. He watched her staff get reorganized around her. He watched the arrangements move while she was still in the building. And by the time it was finished, Diana was being managed rather than protected, and everybody involved was extremely polite about it. He walked off his mark and across that hall to the technical area, and the entire crew stopped what they were doing. He did not use a title. He did not soften it. He put a finger up and pointed it at his stepmother's face in front of 11 members of staff, and his voice came out low and flat and carried the whole length of St. George's Hall. His wife stands next to him. Nobody puts her in the shadows. That was the sentence. 11 people heard it. 2 of them will remember it for the rest of their working lives. Camilla did not answer. Her mouth went tight enough to smudge the lipstick at the corner. Her hand closed on the sash of her gown until the knuckles went white. The 2 of them held each other's eyes for about 4 seconds. And in those 4 seconds, the pretense that this is a family with a difficult history but decent manners fell off completely. She turned and walked out of the hall without a word. And the silence is the part that should have worried everybody, because Camilla is not a woman who loses arguments loudly. She loses them quietly, and then she goes away and works. The morning of the ceremony, Windsor was quiet in the way a place is quiet when 600 people are working very hard to make no noise. Guards checking kit in the quadrangle. Florists carrying trays through a side door. The castle doors that would open to international guests in a few hours still shut with 2 men polishing the handles. And deep inside the private apartments, Camilla had already decided she was not going to accept the outcome of that rehearsal. Think about what 12 days of silence looks like from the inside. She had gone through those 12 days without one further word to her stepson about it. And everybody around her had taken that for acceptance, because that is what it usually means in that family. It was not acceptance. It was preparation. She knew exactly how the day would run under the approved plan. Catherine in the frame, the Wales couple walking together, holding the center of every wide shot, the way the public has come to expect, herself beside the king, half a step behind him in a picture that the newspapers would crop the following morning. And she made a decision that a woman in her position should never have been anywhere near. She called her executive assistant to her dressing room, and she locked the door behind him. Heavy oak, an old key, no servants wandering past. On the dressing table and among the makeup and the boxes and the pieces laid out for the day, she put down a small sheet of parchment. She had drawn it herself late the previous night by hand. It showed the procession order with one change in it. A gap opened between Prince William and Princess Catherine, wide enough for one person, and an arrow drawn into that gap in ink that had not been steady when it went down on the paper. That was the whole plan. 1 page, 1 gap, 1 arrow. And I want to be plain about what that page was designed to do, because it was not a spacing adjustment. Walk into a gap between a husband and a wife during a live broadcast in a robe. The width of a doorway, and the wife disappears from the shot. She is not removed from the ceremony. She is removed from the record of it. Every photograph that runs the next morning shows 3 people where there should have been 4, and the 4th is a shoulder at the edge of the frame. The assistant looked at that sheet and started sweating. He knew what he was looking at. Changing the official order after it has been signed off without the approval of the household that owns the ceremony is not a clerical matter. It is the kind of thing that ends a career inside an afternoon and follows a man out of the building for good. He tried to find a way to say no. She did not let him get there. She came around the table and stood closer to him than anybody in that house stand to a member of staff. And she used the 2 things that always work: his job and the things he knew about her household that he would never be able to explain to a new employer. Her instruction was 1 sentence. Before the procession leaves, swap this into the Lord Great Chamberlain's folder. He rolled the sheet, put it inside his coat, and walked out with a face the color of paper. Now I have gone over this next part more times than is healthy, because everything after it depends on it. He crossed the castle to the ceremonial operations room, which is where the official folders sit until they are handed to the men who run the day. There is a table. There is a leather binder with a metal clip. There's a guard on the door, and there's a moment every hour when that guard is replaced, and the doorway belongs to nobody for about 40 seconds. He waited for the changeover. He went to the table. His hand was shaking hard enough that he needed 2 attempts on the clip. He took the legitimate chart out. He put her handwriting in. The clip snapped shut. 40 seconds, and the running order of a 600-year-old ceremony had been altered by a frightened man in a corridor on behalf of a woman who was at that moment looking at herself in a mirror 200 yards away and adjusting an earring. She was pleased. Everything I have been able to establish about that morning says she was genuinely pleased. She believed the folder was clean. She believed the coordinators would work from her page. And she believed that by the middle of the afternoon, her daughter-in-law would be standing behind a stone pillar watching the back of her own husband's head on a monitor. And she had no idea that she had been filmed doing all of it. Because here's the thing about William that Camilla has never fully absorbed. And it is the same thing his uncle failed to absorb about him and his brother and the man who used to run the Dush accounts. He does not react. He prepares. He had watched her walk out of St. George's Hall 12 days earlier without a word. And he had drawn exactly the conclusion I drew when I first went through this, which is that a silent Camilla is a working Camilla. The night before the ceremony, he had a camera put into the operations room, not a device on a tripod with a red light on it, a small unit concealed inside an antique bronze on a side table that has been in that room since the reign of his great-grandmother, recording continuously, feeding to a tablet that stayed in his hands. Nobody on the technical staff was told why. 2 people were told to install it and forget about it. And the request came from the office of a man they will one day work for directly, which is a very persuasive kind of request. And when the assistant came into that room with a rolled sheet inside his coat, William was sitting in his study with a tablet on his knee, watching it happen in real time. He watched the man look at the door. He watched him open the binder. He watched him take out 1 page and put in another. And he watched the shake in his hands while he did it. And when the camera caught the swapped sheet flat on the table for a second and a half before the folder closed, it caught the handwriting on it as well. He saved the file twice. Then he went next door where his wife was getting ready, and he put his arms around her and told her that whatever happened out there today, she should stay exactly where she was meant to be and let him deal with the rest. She did not ask what he meant. That marriage does not run on long explanations. He went to his father with about 90 minutes to spare. Charles was in his private rooms with a valet adjusting the fall of the garter robe across his shoulders, which is a job that takes 2 people and a lot of patience, and which he has done enough times now to be able to hold a conversation through it. William did not knock properly, and he did not open with anything polite. He crossed the room, put the tablet down on his father's desk hard enough to make the pen jump, and press play. And the king stood there in half a robe and watched a man he half recognized open a leather binder in his own operations room and swap a page. I have thought a lot about what that 90 seconds must have been like for him. Charles has spent 30 years being told by half this country that the woman he married is a schemer, and he has spent those same 30 years defending her quietly, stubbornly at real cost to himself. He married her when marrying her was still a live risk to the institution. He put her name on the coronation invitation when his advisors were nervous about it. Whatever anybody thinks of that marriage, the man has never once wavered. And now there was a screen on his desk showing him her handwriting. The valet was sent out. The color went out of the king's face and then came back into it in a way that people in that household describe with the same word every time. Not shouting. Purple. Because Charles is not a fool. And he understood inside about 4 seconds what this was going to cost if it happened live. A queen physically cutting a prince and princess of Wales apart on a broadcast, going to 50 countries in front of ambassadors and heads of state and a crowd on the hill with phones up. That is not a family embarrassment. That is a photograph that gets used for the next 40 years every time anybody wants to explain the state of the British monarchy in one image. And the damage would not have landed on Camilla. It would have landed on the 2 people the whole institution now depends on. There was no family meeting arranged. There was no discreet conversation, no note passed between private secretaries, no draft document circulated for comment. Anybody who knows how that house normally handles a problem should stop here and notice that because every instinct in that building says handle it quietly and write nothing down. Charles did the opposite, and I think I know why. He has spent his adult life inside the wreckage of what quiet handling does. Everything that happened to his first wife happened quietly. Everything was managed by decent people who wrote nothing down. And by the end of it, there was no record anywhere of who had decided what. And a boy of 15 walked behind a coffin through a city that had made up its own mind about all of them. He went to the oak cabinet in the corner of the room, and he took out the things that only come out when something has gone properly wrong. A beeswax candle, a stick of dark red sealing wax, a sheet of parchment. He wrote the instruction out by hand, held the wax over the flame until it ran, dripped it at the foot of the page, and pressed his signate ring into it while it was still soft, leaving the impression of the crown in red at the bottom. That is not decoration. In that family, a sealed instruction is the difference between a preference and an order that a serving officer is obliged to carry out on the spot without going back up the line to check. He read it back once before the wax went on, which is a thing people who knew him as a younger man say he never used to do. He does it now. Every word on that page was going to be carried out by somebody else in front of several thousand people, and he wanted no room in it for interpretation. The instruction had two parts. The Prince and Princess of Wales would walk together for the entire procession, and that arrangement was not to be varied by anybody. And the officer holding the instruction was authorized to remove any person who broke the approved order regardless of rank, regardless of title, in front of whoever happened to be watching. Regardless of title. For words on a piece of parchment written by a man about to walk his wife out in front of the world. The following morning, he handed it to his sister. And this is where the day stops being a family argument and turns into something with teeth. So, let me explain the position she holds, because most people watching that broadcast had no idea what they were looking at. And his gold stick in waiting. It is one of the oldest appointments in the country. It goes back to the 15th century, and it means that during a state ceremony, the physical safety and good order of the sovereign's person are formerly her responsibility. She carried it at the coronation, walking behind her brother in uniform on a horse, and she has carried it at the state opening of Parliament since. Alongside that, she has been a Royal Lady of the Order of the Garter since 1994, which means that at Windsor in June, she is not a guest at that procession. She is part of the machinery of it. The practical consequence is the part that matters, and tells a procession to stop, and the procession stops and nobody in the line has any standing to argue with her, including the woman married to the king. Charles gave her the parchment in his own rooms, with William standing by the window, and he told her to carry it out without any consideration whatsoever for his wife. Sources close to that morning say, and read it once, folded it, and asked one question, which was whether her brother had understood that she would do it in front of the cameras if she had to. He said he had. She put it inside her jacket and went to get changed. And that is the piece of this that I keep turning over, because everybody focused afterwards on what Camilla did on the square. The real decision of that day was made in a quiet room an hour before anybody left the castle by a 77-year-old man in a robe who chose for once in his life to write the thing down and hand it to the one person in his family who has never in 50 years failed to carry out an instruction exactly as given. The trap was set. It was signed, sealed, and walking around inside a jacket pocket. And the woman it had been built for was 2 floors below, having her robe adjusted, entirely certain that she had already won. Garter Day at Windsor is one of the few things this country still does entirely without irony. Clear sky. Thousands of people packed along the walk from the castle down to the chapel. Flags, children on shoulders, the older ones who have come every June for 30 years standing in the same spot. They always stand in the mounted band, the ayman, the blue velvet robes, and the plumed hats that look absurd in a photograph and look like something else entirely when 800 years of them come down a hill towards you, broadcast live to 50 countries. Every fixed camera position agreed weeks in advance. The procession came out through the castle gates in order, and Camilla walked out beside the king with a smile on her face that the correspondents afterwards all described the same way. Comfortable. She looked at the crowd. She looked at the cameras on their platforms. And she believed with total confidence that her page was in that folder, and her page was what the coordinators were working from. She had no way of knowing that the coordinators had been handed a corrected order at 7 that morning, or that the woman walking a few places behind her had a sealed instruction inside her jacket, or that the whole thing had been sitting on a tablet since the previous afternoon. For about 4 minutes, everything looked exactly as it has looked every June for as long as anybody watching had been alive. Then the procession reached the open square in front of St. George's Chapel, where the crowd is thickest and the camera positions are closest, and where any change in the shape of a line is visible to every single person present. That is where she moved. She picked up her pace. She came through the line at an angle quickly, the way somebody moves when they have rehearsed a thing in their head enough times to have stopped thinking about it. And she stepped directly into the space between William and Catherine. Her shoulder caught Catherine's arm as she came through. The robe did the rest. That much fabric moving sideways is a wall, and it swung across exactly where the main camera platform had its shot, and for a second and a half, the Princess of Wales was a hand and a sleeve at the edge of frame that had been built to hold 4 people. Catherine broke stride to avoid going into her. She recovered it inside a step the way she recovers everything and kept her face completely still. And Camilla looked back over her shoulder at her once with an expression that 2 photographers on that platform caught, and that has been on the internet ever since. She had about 3 seconds to enjoy it because a white glove went up at the front of the line and stopped walking, raised her hand straight above her head and held it there. And the effect of that on 800 people in formation is instant and total. The band cut the line, concerted, and stopped. The crowd noise dropped away and away from the front of the square to the back. The way it does when several thousand people all realize at the same moment that something is wrong. A royal procession does not stop. That is the entire point of a royal procession. It has stopped for a death, and it has stopped for a bomb. And outside of that, it does not stop. And every single person on that square with any knowledge of these events understood in about 2 seconds that they were watching something none of them would see again. The silence went on for longer than television is comfortable with. Then, and stepped out of the formation. She walked back down the line in front of the crowd, in front of the cameras, in front of the diplomatic guests standing at the chapel door, and she stopped in front of the wife of the king. Nobody has ever established exactly what she said, and the microphones on that platform picked up nothing usable. 3 people close enough to hear have given the same short version to 2 different journalists, and it amounts to 4 words. Back to your place. And then she stood there and waited, which is the part that finished it. She did not repeat herself. She did not take her by the arm. She stood in the middle of that square in front of the world and waited for a queen to move. Camilla's face went. Everybody who has seen the footage has watched this same thing happen in about a second and a half. The confidence goes first, then the color, and then something underneath both of them that she has spent 20 years making sure the cameras never get. She understood immediately that the folder had not saved her, and that everybody in her EY line knew it. She moved. William stepped across, took his wife's hand, and walked her forward into the space that had opened. And the 2 of them went up towards the chapel door together with the crowd on both sides of them applauding. Because a British crowd will always work out who to applaud within 4 seconds of anything happening, and the crowd noticed. That is the part the palace could do nothing about afterwards. Several thousand people on a hill with phones in their hands had watched a Princess of Wales get walked into, and a Princess Royal stopped the entire procession over it. And the footage was on the internet before the chapel doors were shut. By that evening, there were 4 separate angles of it, one of them steady enough to see the shoulder go in. Camilla was left at the edge of the line. The formation closed. She fell in at the back behind people she has outranked at every ceremony for 20 years. And she walked the last H100 red yards to the chapel door in the wrong place, in full robes in front of ambassadors, heads of state, and several thousand people who had all watched exactly what happened and had begun audibly to talk about it. There's a shot from a long lens on the hill that shows that walk. She has her chin up and her eyes forward, and she is completely alone in the middle of a crowd of 800 people, and there is nothing in her face at all, because by then she had it back under control. That is the most public humiliation this country has handed a queen consort in living memory, and it took about 40 seconds, and nobody laid a finger on her. Then the chapel doors closed behind them, and the cameras stayed outside. And whatever anybody thinks happened on that square, what happened in the next 20 minutes on the other side of that door is the part one want to tell you about. The private room they use at St. George's is smaller than people imagine. Stone, a long table, a few heavy chairs, one window with old glass in it. The doors are oak, and they are thick. And when they shut, the noise of 800 people outside drops to nothing in about a second. Two men closed those doors and stood in front of them. And the moment the public was on the other side of that wood, Camilla turned around and let go of everything she had been holding on the walk up. She went at the king first, voice up, hands going, the words coming out in the order they had presumably been arriving in her head for the last 100 yards. Her question was how he could humiliate her in front of the entire world. She is the queen. He had let it happen. He had destroyed her standing for the sake of a daughter-in-law. Her breathing was audible across the room. There's a version of that scene going around social media in which she is described as screaming, and everybody who was in that room has been clear that she was not screaming. She was worse than screaming. She was arguing at volume in front of witnesses with her husband on the day of a state ceremony in a room she could not leave. And Catherine stepped forward. I want you to understand how out of character that is, because in 14 years of public life, that woman has never once put herself into a confrontation. She is the person in that family who de-escalates. She steps back. She smiles. She changes the subject. She gets everybody through the doorway. She did not do that here. She walked to the middle of the room, looked directly at her, and said the only thing anybody said in that entire 20 minutes that Camilla could not answer. Nobody else caused this. She had walked between a husband and a wife in front of the cameras herself, and everything that happened afterwards had followed from that. Camilla laughed at her. That is what the accounts all say, and I keep coming back to it, because it tells you exactly how safe she believed she was. She laughed, and she said that the ceremonial chart had recorded the order that way, and asked what right anybody in that room had to accuse her of anything without evidence. And I want you to sit with that laugh for a second, because it is the last confident sound that woman made in this story. She wasn't bluffing. She genuinely believed there was nothing left to produce, and she was standing in a stone room in full robes, daring the future king to produce it. She believed the sheet was gone. She had been told the sheet was gone. Whatever her assistant had said to her that morning about destroying it after the swap, she had taken it at face value, and she was standing in a stone room accusing her stepson of slander with total confidence about 10 feet from a table. Nobody answered her immediately, and answered a different question instead. And this is the moment that broke Catherine. She had been standing very straight since the doors closed, doing the thing she has been doing perfectly since she was 29, which is to hold her face absolutely still and let the room happen around her. She had done it on the square with a shoulder in her arm and a camera on her. She had done it walking up the hill. She was still doing it, and came over and said one thing to her quietly, and it was not about Camilla at all. She told her that her mother-in-law used to do exactly that. That Diana, when something went wrong in front of the cameras, would take the hit, keep her face completely still, and finish the walk, and that she had learned it very young, and it had cost her something every single time she did it. And that was it. That was what got through after everything else had bounced off. Not the shoulder, not the robe, not 20 minutes of being shouted about in the third person by a woman standing 8 feet away. A remark about a woman who has been dead since 1997 from the one person in that family who watched her do it. Catherine's eyes went, and she did not get them back. She did not sob, and she did not sit down, and she did not give anybody in that room anything to describe afterwards. But she stood there with her chin up, and the tears came down, and she let them because there was nothing left in her to stop them with. Nobody in that room said anything for a moment. The king looked at the floor and stayed exactly where she was, which is what she does, and put one hand briefly on her nephew's wife's arm and took it away again. Her husband saw it, and that is when William went to the table. He had been silent since the doors closed. Everybody who has described that room describes him the same way, standing near the window, saying nothing, letting his stepmother talk herself all the way out to the end of the branch she was standing on.